Hello and welcome to the third run of the University of Southampton and Future Learn course, Agincourt, Myth and Reality. My name's Mike Warner and I'm a PhD researcher here at the University of Southampton researching the battle. I'm also a mentor on this course along with Dr. Alexander Lobanov. Thank you for joining me for this review of the activities of this past week one of the course. It's seen a huge number of comments being posted and some really interesting points being raised. We've got a huge number of people on the course at the moment. Over 6,000 have signed up, 1,700 are active and 50 have already completed the course. Once you've completed the course, you can purchase a statement of participation to remember it as well. So those 700 actively participating, actively posting comments, we've received over 4,500 comments in total. Alex and myself are trying to respond to these questions. There's a huge number of them. So I'm going to respond to a few of the general themes this afternoon and talk about some of the areas in which there's been particular debate this week. So one of the early topics covered at the beginning of this course, which drew a lot of attention and created a lot of excellent debate, is the legitimacy of Henry's claim to the French throne and whether he was justified in launching his invasion in 1415. So firstly then on Henry V's claim, we know that he did have a claim, a reasonably strong claim, to the French crown. His grandfather, John of Gaunt, was son of Edward III, who you've read about himself, is the original monarch who had a very strong claim to that French crown. So did Henry V have a claim in 1415? Yes, he did have a claim. Was he justified in launching his war against his invasion of France in 1415. He certainly portrayed himself as being justified. He portrayed it as though he'd been denied what was his birthright, the crown of France, and in particular the lands of Normandy. So why then does he decide to invade in 1415? This isn't just because of his birth, because he presumes he has a claim to this land, but I think he would also have viewed the internal problems within France closely. He would have kept a close eye on the deteriorating relationship between the Armagnacs and the Burgundians. In 1407, the Duke of Burgundy had ordered the murder of the Duke of Orleans and created this internal division within France would go on to really spin out into quite a large civil war. So Henry V would have looked at this opportunity and seen that he could exploit this by invading in 1415. We've also got to consider, I think, the situation within England in 1415, or certainly within England in 1413, when Henry V becomes king. During the reign of his father, Henry IV, there had been significant issues for the crown to deal with, particularly Owen Glendower's revolt in Wales, problems in Scotland and in Ireland. These issues had tied down Henry's attention for much of his reign. By the time Henry V becomes king in 1413, however, quite a lot of these issues have started to subside, and so he is able to turn his attention back to France again. We should also consider that Henry, we may think of Henry as a very, very brilliant king, but in those early years there was a huge amount of scepticism about his right to rule over England. I think this is clearly demonstrated by the Southampton plot, which you'll have read about this week in the course, just before the army embarks for France. He didn't have an absolute grip on the crown. How could he ensure that he was to get that grip? Well, he could turn the national attention away from him, stop people asking whether his father had usurped Richard II, and divert their attention towards France, towards the old enemy. We obviously know that the Battle of Agincourt worked in Henry's favour, and partly because of the battle, his grip on the crown became pretty much absolute afterwards. So was Henry justified in invading France in 1415? He had a claim, most certainly, and he certainly had reasons to invade, and he certainly portrayed himself as being justified to invade. So by the standards of the time, yes, he probably was justified. Another area then, moving on, that lots of people have commented on and observed and made debate, taken part in debates about, is the formation of the army. Many are surprised about the level of administration and logistics behind the raising of the Agincourt army. We've seen some of the documents in the videos of Anne and Dan during this week with those documents at the National Archives in Kew. We know that the army gathered around Southampton, and we know that there was around about 12,000 men, combatants, probably far more as well, if we consider additional companies of miners, squires and servants and household attendants as well. We know Henry V takes members of his household across with him. So together we're probably looking at nearer 20,000 men that gather around Southampton in the summer of 1415. Where do these people come from? A number of questions have been asked on this topic, and it's really from everywhere across the country. The lords who raised the very large retinues, such as the Duke of Clarence, drew a large number of his captains from the lands that he owned, and also individuals who had been associated with Henry IV beforehand. We've also seen that in addition to all of the men that gathered around Southampton, a huge number of horses were also brought to Southampton and shipped across to France with the army. Indeed, we know that every archer brought one horse with them. A duke brought 50 horses, an earl 25, a banneret 16, a knight 6, and an esquire 4. So there's a huge number of horses that were shipped across the channel as well, as Dr. Lambert's article pointed out. Why would an archer have a horse? Well, it probably wasn't to fight on. I don't know, but I doubt it's possible to easily shoot a longbow from horseback. But it's to make, they would have taken the horses then, to make the army far more mobile. It would have allowed them to cover far greater distances at far greater speed. Of course, if the archer who had brought only one horse was unfortunate enough to either lose his horse or for it to be killed, he's going to have to walk rather than ride. We also know that the wage rates were reasonably good for the period. Some people have commented on the fact that an archer's paid 6p a day. This is quite a good wage for the period. A carpenter earns in the middle of the first decade around about 4.5p a day. So an archer to earn 6p is quite a large sum of money. So there's a huge amount that could be talked about. But I hope that I've just glossed over some of the key areas of debate this week. And if I haven't touched on something that you think needs to be discussed, please do put it in the comments below, and I'll try and respond, and in the next week's review we'll try and touch on it then. But coming up next week, things really start to heat up. We have the battle itself towards the end of the week, but we also have the Siege of Harfleur before it. Dan Spencer's looking at the role of artillery in that siege. We've also got the march to Calais and the route that the soldiers took, and then, as I say, the battle itself and why were the English victorious over the more numerous French. So please do keep sending your comments. Please do keep commenting on all the articles. We really enjoy reading them, and there's some really thoughtful discussions going on. So please do continue to enjoy the course. Thank you.